Live from Washington, D.C., it's Quintessential Listening, Poetry Online Radio. Now, here's your host, Dr. Michael Anthony Ingram.
Good evening, and welcome to the program. Tonight I am joined by one of my favorite poets, Lynne Viti. Her newest book is Dancing at Lake Montebello. Hello, Lynne. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, and really happy to be here.
Well, happy belated birthday.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think I'm going to celebrate it in July, I think.
Okay. All right. Fantastic.
Not quite ready to celebrate it now.
Okay. Well, let me ask this question. You've written books. You've published poems and journals and other types of publications. What does being creative mean to you?
I think it means, if you go to the basic meaning of the word, it means to make something. And I think that for me, I love words, and obviously, like most human beings, I have very deep feelings about many things. And I also have a quirky sense of humor. So for me, there are different ways to create. I like to bake, I like to cook, I like to garden, but there's something about making something with words, and then sort of sending it out into the world and hoping that other people will read it and take an interest in it. To me, that's what creating is, making something primarily for me with words
Quite beautiful.
that call up emotions, observations, fears, celebrations, all of those things.
Well, what do you believe is the best advice you've ever been given about how to be more creative?
Well, I think we've all heard the old saw about writing is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration, and I think that there's a lot of truth in that the discipline of writing, even if you don't feel like writing or you don't really think you're inspired, I think just the importance of either keeping a journal or a notebook of ideas, because I certainly don't every day wake up and say, I think I'll write 3 sonnets today, but I try to write something down, even if it's a little note, a text that I send to myself because I see something and I think that would make a good poem, but I'm in the middle of something else that does not involve writing, and I have to finish that other task because it's crucial, it's time sensitive. But if I get that idea down, I can go back to it. And I think that notion that not every day has to result in a polished poem, not every week really, but just sort of saving up these scraps of insight or little flashes of curiosity, and then at some point saying, well, I've been saving these up for about a week. I should sit down and go through some of these and see if I can write something. And I think, to me, that's part of it, the discipline of writing. But I think the other advice that I got a long time ago from a fellow writer who had quite a lot of success. She didn't start writing mystery novels until she was in her late 40s. And we were in a writing group together, and she said to all of us, because we were all just starting to submit our work, and we were getting rejections, and she said, you have to believe in your own work. You have to believe in it. And I think there are times when I write something and I work on it, and then I think, I just don't think this is that good. I'm just going to push it to the side and maybe forever and move on to something else because I want to believe in it. Because when I send it out and I think, and I've got one I've sent out a bunch of times and it has gotten rejected 4 or 5 times, and it won a prize in a contest, and I still can't get it published as a single poem. I haven't yet. And I think it's not the poem. I just got to keep sending it out because I know it's a good poem, And I think it's worth publishing. It's just I have to hit the editor at the right point. But if I don't send it out, it's not going to get published. So I think believing in your own work is important. You should take pride in it, and you should send it out.
Well, without further ado, please share some of your work.
I will. And I'm going to start with one poem from Dancing at Lake Montebello. And then I'm going to read some of my newer work, meaning this book came out in November of 2020, so the ink is not quite dry on it, but I have a lot of poems that I have written since then I thought I would share. And they fall into several different categories, which I'll talk about as I reach them. This is a poem in the first section of Dancing at Lake Montebello, which is that whole section of the book is really retrospective, thinking back to my early days, particularly with my father, and then sometimes with my mother. But this particular poem, I spent a lot of time with my father at his place of work, which was a bar in a section of Baltimore called Highlandtown, or as we in Baltimore pronounce it, Hollandtown. And this is a poem just about what it was like to go down there early in the morning before business started. He would take me down there, and then my mother would come fetch me before the day started because she didn't want me hanging around the bar, a working man's bar. Early morning in Highlandtown. In my mind's eye, I see it, the stub of a macadam road, dead-ending into blue diamond coal, its trucks lined up each morning for the long hauls. To the left, the junkyard, heaps of metal and rubber, hard by an Italianate house, rust-brown, coated with years of dust and cinder ash, face the junkyard cranes. A porch swing, always vacant, even on summer evenings, only the metal cranes saw. The folks who lived in the house, white-haired, plainly dressed, bespectacled, came and went together, but mostly stayed home. My father's tavern sat amongst these places, the last in a row of houses. In its former life, the bar housed a bakery, we heard. The baker's family lived upstairs in the cramped rooms, their kitchen the bakery itself. I used to pretend I could smell bread baking, the sweet fragrance of airy white loaves turning golden in the long-gone ovens. I went with my father there before dawn, the half-light bathing the block in a sepia glow. I sat at a small table in the back bar reading comics, or on the ragged sidewalk I stood peering down as my father slid each beer keg into a hand truck, rolled it up a plywood ramp and into the tavern. Light crept in through the glass bricks in the storefront. I leaned around the corner of the dark wood bar, watched him roll the keg from hand cart to its station, waited for the hiss when he tapped the silver barrel. I inhaled the faint, yeasty smell. Sounds of traffic began to flow in from the bar's back door, still propped open. I was sent to pick the paper up from the doorstep, laid it on my father's work table near the curved jukebox. It wouldn't be switched on till lunchtime. Hank Williams and Jerry Lee's wails would issue from it. But by then I would be back home. Quiet streets, small green lawns, lolling on an old quilt spread in shade. Thank you.
I need to ask this question.
Oh,
Let me ask this question, please.
Okay.
That was sublime.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am just so struck by your talent.
Thank you. I should say before... I'm sorry, go ahead, Michael.
No, please. I'm sorry.
I was going to say I had planned to say this at the beginning before I started reading, but I would like to dedicate all the reading that I do tonight to somebody who was very, very dear to me, and she passed away last Saturday. Her name was Sister Carol Estelle Wheeler. She was a Sister of Mercy, and she was my English teacher in 10th grade and 12th grade, and she was just a lifelong mentor and advisor, and she was the one who really taught me how to read poetry and appreciate it and encouraged my own writing of poetry from a young age.
Very nice.
Sister Carol.
Very nice. Very nice. Please continue, and I'll never interrupt again. Please continue.
No, that's okay. That's fine. This is an Ars Poetica, and that's the title of this poem. I wrote this as part of an exercise in a workshop that I did at the William Joyner Institute for the Study of War and Violence, which is at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And the workshop has run many years, and there's a hiatus right now, of course, because of COVID and other issues. But I took a workshop with the amazing Martin Espada, who is one of my favorite poets, and he gave us a prompt and sent us off for an hour, and everyone came back, and this is what I came up with, and now I've worked on it a little bit more. Ars Poetica. Beneath each little story I was told from a tender age by my mother, aunts, grandmother, stories with well-defined plots, narratives populated by the storytellers themselves, assisted by a cast of characters from outside our family. Beneath each tale, I sensed there was another, a truer story, an alternate text, a painful experience smoothed over, packaged not only for my child's ears, but for the grown-ups as well. The war turned your uncle into an alcoholic. Uncle Sam made him a bombardier. It broke him. Your father was so changed after his accident. When we had to send you to live with Aunt Kay, I visited you every day. You were always an oversensitive child. Digging up the understory's bones to get at the marrow, sucking out the deepest part of my history without manipulating it, telling it, that's my job. And if you tell me it never happened that way, the way you wrote it, I say, write your own poem. That's the end of that one. This is a mixed bag here. I went through my journal and kind of went to town a couple weeks ago in between other chores. This poem is actually based on a painting by a painter who spent half of his time in on the Cape and half of his time in Baltimore, which is where he lived, in the winter season and fall. And he taught as well in Baltimore. He taught art, and his name was Herman Merrill. And the title of this poem is based on the title of a painting that he's done, and part of the painting is a version of the painting by another artist named Jeff Blum, is on the front of my book, Dancing at Lake Montebello, and it lots of oranges and yellows, and the shot tower, which is a Baltimore monument, in the background. And the title is, After Herman Merrill's, I Return to the Hot, Humid City. Heavy air stalls over the harbor. I'm back from the seashore too soon. On East Fayette, bodies on front stoops hardly move, unable to do more than lift glasses of water to their lips. Someone's brought out a portable radio, a maroon plastic box, set it on the sidewalk. There are debates between neighbors, between adults and teenagers, as to which station, R&B or the ball game, is more suitable. I walk to the corner store for a pack of smokes. The humidity presses down on me. It will be like this tonight and tomorrow and the next day. It ain't the heat, man, I hear the fellow in front of me in line muse. It's the dang humidity. I've miscalculated, returned in the dog days when I should be sitting on a wraparound porch, looking out on the Atlantic, sweet ocean breeze on my arms, good sleeping weather. From my window, buildings tinted orange by the sun's last heat blasts, the shot tower, a sentry over the baking town. And that's the end of that one. Okay, this next one, I told you this was a mixed bag. This is called Engineers, and this is based on a semester that I spent teaching writing at a very small engineering college in Needham, Massachusetts called Olin. It's only been around for about 20 years. I was listening to these engineers talk about their assignments in their other classes while I was teaching composition to them. Engineers. The first years had barely unpacked, moved into their dorm spaces before their first task popped up on email. Go out into a suburban asphalt road flanked by, go out into a field, catch a jumping insect, the instructor directed. Preferably put your find in a large glass jar. Turn the jar sideways, observe, study the way the insect's legs hinge, how the joints operate, so efficiently, without oil, without a motor. Notice how gracefully it deploys its limbs as it tries to jump its way out of the glass trap. And then, because their professor was a Buddhist, she added, do your observations quickly. Use your phone to make a video or sketch your grasshopper, cricket, leafhopper quickly. Pay attention to nature's perfect engineering. Then, unscrew the jar lid, let your subject go. Watch it jump across the brown September grasses. Always remember this. Okay, that's the end of that one. I should say that, of course, they were studying the insects so they could make machines that mimic the insect. So that was like an interesting first assignment. I have two poems about moons. One's short and one's long. I'll start with the short one. I believe that I wrote this before COVID hit. Cold Moon. Winter self longs for summer. High winds scuttle leaves that weeks ago seemed frozen to the ground. A full cold moon lights up the mess of a front yard, straw and earth flung there by a wayward sidewalk plow. Summer self never longs for winter, never even thinks of it. Instead, fixes itself in the moments of each long day, taking in the soil's heat underfoot well after the sun drops. Okay, this next one, that's that one. This is a long one. After this, everyone will probably need a snack. Lenten Moonrise. Lenten Moonrise. Like the infant who has confused night and day, or the baby napping for hours in a sunny bassinet, batting at crib toys all night, I've swapped night for day. Prowl around the house, coughing so hard I strain muscles in my neck. My partner, self-exiled to the single futon 2 flights of stairs away in the house's lower level, has stuffed his ears with plugs, so sturdy they can protect against clanging guitars, amplified 100-fold through speakers, to insulate him against my racking cough. It's flu, not the novel coronavirus, perhaps not real flu, just a flu-like illness, an imposter, bringing chills, fever, malaise. Sleep and rest under an automatic blanket is the only cure, and tea, water, juice, broth, any of this tastes finest in the wee hours. Outside an unfamiliar landscape, devoid of house lights, I look out the kitchen windows to the home whose backyard abuts ours. The moon is just past full, barely waning. I look for animals in the yard, the ones who do their work at night. Deer who gnaw the yews, strip them of needles, or browse the fir trunks with their antlers. The hawk that we see sometimes, mornings, when the garden is profuse with green and purple blooms, not like now, when all is brown, or bleached out stalks of white, oak leaves that arrange themselves against the side of the low deck, or between large stepping stones to the grass. Pale brown blades like an old carpet we should roll up for the trash. On this Valentine's Day of flu, I have missed the moonrise. Well after midnight, I watch it illuminate the yard. I tiptoe so as not to awaken the cat who roams the basement all night looking out the window by the washing machine, or prowls for intruders, centipedes, stink bugs, the occasional mouse. I click on the electric kettle, brew another cup of tea and dose it with honey, drop in a lemon wedge, carry the mug back to bed. I read till sleep comes. Tomorrow I'll collect the tissues I've flung to the floor all night in the cough drop wrappers. The moon shines silver through the windows. I embrace the quiet now at 3 a.m., make my peace with it, soothed by the moon's beams falling across the quilt. Tomorrow the moon will set, while I dream stories I'll half remember, and the moon will hide wherever it hides. By night it will emerge anew, a spare, ascetic, Lenten moon. Okay, that's that one.
You know, I forgot to ask the question. I was so thunderstruck by your work.
What's the question?
It's the question. Do you come from a literary background? And part two of that is, what did you learn growing up about writing?
Those are really interesting questions that nobody has asked me that particular way before. I grew up with a mother who was a teacher, which is probably key because she read to me. She was an elementary school teacher when I was growing up, and she actually was teaching first grade when I was in kindergarten. And she talked the principal into letting me come spend my afternoons at her school. It was like a daycare issue. She said, I got out at noon. What was going to happen to me between noon and when she finished at 3:30? So Miss Culbertson, the sainted principal of Mom's school, said she can come, and I sat in the classroom. So of course all the first graders were learning to read. So I was a kindergartner. I didn't realize that I wasn't supposed to learn to read yet, so I learned to read too. And she brought the books home and the primers and as soon as, she always read to me and she always took me to the library, but as soon as I could read at all, I always had my nose in a book. And I think, I love to listen to my mother read. She would read me poetry. She would read me fairy tales. She would, she was a great reader herself. And I think my father read, but he read like the newspaper and the sports page and, the American Legion magazine and the Mary Knoll Mission magazine. But my mother loved stories, and she loved movies too. And so I think that I grew up in a book-rich environment since the time I was little. And, of course, I loved school. So, I think that just kept going and going. And by the time I got to high school, I went to this wonderful school, girls' high school, Catholic girls' school, where we had these just the most wonderful young teachers. They were all like Sister Carol, who passed away last weekend. She was 24 when we were 14 in her class. They were so energetic and so dedicated, and so I guess that would be a literary background. And then
Yes.
I wanted to major in English, so I just kept doing it. So I think that would be the answer. But a lot of it, I think, was my mother. She was somebody who had grown up from very humble background and was a child of divorce, and nobody in her family read, maybe magazines. But she loved school, and she said school was her salvation, and she just blossomed. So I think that was what both my sister and I benefited from, was having a mother who read to us and encouraged us to read and gave us books and took us to the library every other week. So I can't remember the second question. The second question.
Well, the second question is, what did you learn about writing growing up?
Oh, writing. Yeah. Well, I think I never minded having to write anything in school. And any time there was an opportunity for something creative, like write a play or write a skit, I had my hand up. And there was a librarian, Miss Coughlin, at the branch library that we went to in Baltimore City, who had a big binder, and she said to me, "These are stories that children who come here have written. I would like you to write a story." And I said, "Oh, sure, I'll write a story." Of course, I started it, and then I was young. I was about 7. And I kind of lost my mojo halfway through. And every time I went to the library, she'd say, "When am I going to see the rest of your story?" I gave her part of it. And she just shamed me into doing it. And my mother would say, my mother's big thing was, finish what you started. Like, you can't quit Girl Scouts in the middle of the year. You got to finish the year out. You got don't stop in the middle. You got to finish it. So I finished the story, and I was just so proud when I saw that the librarian had typed it up and put it in her book that I started writing more. And I was a letter writer. Too, and I would write little plays and make the younger kids in the neighborhood be in my plays, and so on. It's like, okay, we're going to do a play, and this is about, like, opening day or something at the ballpark, You be Gus Triendos. Okay.
Let's take a brief break, and we'll be right back.
All right.
wonderful Lynne Viti. Please call in. The call-in number is 646-787-1631 if you have a question for Lynne. I have another question for Lynne. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. Some poets claim that a poem is like a living creature. Once it's out there, there's not much you can do to correct or improve it, while others edit meticulously, not leaving much from the original draft poem. What is your take on it?
Well, I've done both, and I think it is, especially if you're a detail-oriented person, it's hard even after it's been published. I just was reading one. I was self-editing as I went along. I thought, why did I say it that way? And I just edited it when I read it, a little tiny thing. But I think at some point you have to let it go. I mean, if it's in a book, it's done. I mean, I suppose you could go back and rewrite it, but I think it is. It's sort of an artifact by the time it really gets set up in print. I think that's true. I mean, I think especially for those of us who revise and revise and revise, you know, some of these poems go through 10 or 11 revisions, and even when you're reading the proofs for a book, you say, okay, you don't want to drive the publisher crazy, but you think that line just does not work, and I want to change it to this. So that's kind of your last chance. But at that point, I mean, I don't just like write them out, type them up, and they're done. You know, I do a lot of revision, and it continues and continues until not only till I submit the manuscript altogether, but as I'm doing those proofreading it, really is also kind of copy editing it. But also there's that: is there a better word, or have I used the same word or the same turn of phrase twice in this collection. I need to rethink that. So
yes,
I would say that's
yes.
the last chance. And after that, I think it has to be done. I mean, I could drive myself crazy.
Well, with all of that,
changes.
Knowing what goes into writing a poem and whether the process is a meticulous one or one where it's a one and done, so to speak, does writing energize or exhaust you?
Oh, it energizes me, no doubt.
Tell me more. Tell me more.
Well, I think I just had to put together a group of 15 new poems or rough poems for a workshop that I'm doing with a very well-known poet who herself has published many, many books. And you're not supposed to send in something that you've already published. You're not supposed to send in something that you've polished to death. It has to be something that's still in formation. And it was really hard for me to do that because I would say, I know I can do better than this, but yet the advice was it should still be kind of in a draft form, and if it doesn't have a title, that's okay. Because one of the days in the workshop, we have to submit something with no title or a not very good title. So I think it's, I don't know. I've kind of lost track of the question.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Whether it energizes you or not.
It does energize me, and I think the part what I find exhausting is when everything is said and done, when you're looking at a whole manuscript and you get the final set of proofs, and you have to really be. And this is the point at which in the old days they just turned over to a copy editor. But you really have to be your own copy editor. And that is really difficult because you're so close to the work, whereas somebody who would come in and look, who's an ace at, reading copy, it would be easier for them than it is for you because you're close to it and you're reading it and you're probably inserting words where they're not there, but they should be. So it's very hard for me to switch. And I did this as a teacher. I was always assiduously copy editing my students' work way more than I should have.
Right.
And it's hard to do it for your own work, and that is exhausting. I mean, you just think, I never want to look at this poem again, or the other 91 poems in this collection. So I find that tedious work. I don't love that tedious work, but the actual draft and revise and revise and revise and revise, I find it energizing.
All right. Please share some more of your work.
Okay, I've got, again, I said this was going to be a mixed bag, and I have a couple more in this group that are not related to each other. And then I have some, if we have time, a couple of the pandemic poems that I mentioned. All right,
great.
This one, a couple years ago, a good friend of mine and a teacher and poet, and I taught a course in Ireland, and we took 12 students to Ireland with us. We spent all our time, 2 weeks in the west of Ireland, and they were learning about poetry and history, and they were writing, and we were all doing a lot of writing. And one of the towns, the first town that we stayed in, is called Letterfrack, County Galway, and it is kind of an artist center, and poets and writers are attracted to the town. It's right near the coast, and it's just a very special, very small place. Not far. It's in the Connemara Mountains, and it's near Kylemore Abbey. So those are something. But there's also something else about this town, and it was the site of a school run by an order of Roman Catholic brothers, and it was a school for sort of wayward boys. They were kids who, maybe they had gotten in trouble in school, maybe they stole a bike, maybe they were just very recalcitrant kids who didn't mind their parents. Somehow they ended up at this school, and there were many, many abuses at the school, and it was just an outrage. They were treated so badly, and it was like physical discipline that exceeded any discipline that you would, use on a child, and then there was sexual abuse. And it's all over the town are these poems, these poetry walks where there are poets, very well-known poets, have written poems about this. Okay, so this poem is called Leaving Letterfrack, County Galway. Already I miss the ghosts of those lost boys, maltreated by the so-called Christian brothers. I miss the graveyard, where the small headstones recite each boy's name and age at death. 10, 12, 14. The little crosses line up in perfect, straight rows. It's no wonder all of Ireland has lost its faith. Now the preschoolers' laughter spills from their playground, a stone's throw from the old industrial school. My heart is weighed down by the thoughts of the boys whose misdemeanors or unruliness at home landed them in that hellish place. Starved, beaten, violated, neglected in the classroom, and punished, tortured in their dormitories, damaged, unprepared for work or for life. On a luxury bus, I try to leave the bleak letterfrack behind, till all that's left of the place for me is the poetry, whereby poets pay tribute to the boys of letterfrack, mark their suffering, keep their memory ever present, in verse posted on pub doors or on the path by the youth hostel, up the lane to the cemetery, all testaments to those dark acts and that suffering buried in the letterfrack earth. That's the end of that one. This next one, well, I think it speaks for itself. This is about an Episcopal priest, which is to say, Episcopal priests can get married and have children, as opposed to Roman Catholic priests who are celibate. The priest at Abby and Francisco's wedding. The groom was Spanish. The bride was not. You presided at the wedding, suitably formal, adhering to the Book of Common Prayer. Then came the reception, a ballroom full of round tables draped with ivory cloths, champagne glasses that would be filled, refilled. By the end of the evening, the guests from Spain, friends and family of the groom, danced atop the tables. How noisy they were, how their feet pounded the tabletops. They cried out and sang, but this was nothing compared to watching you do the twist. You'd shed your Roman collar. Your white shirt was open at the throat. You were like the high school kid we never knew you as, the party lover with a contemplative side. When you went down on the mountain trail in Nepal, having defied doctors' orders and convention, as you always did, when your heart, full and ever fuller, surged and stopped, when your companions hauled your body to the village crematory, when they left your ashes and bones on the Annapurna Trail, when your flame went out, you were always on to the next journey, the Camino de Santiago, the Ruta de Pellegrino. You were fearless, some thought foolish, but I remember the day we talked of my father's death, when you said, "It's where we're all headed," and a chill ran through me. Pilgrim, seeker, tell me now, what am I to do with your 5 paintings, stuffed in a cardboard packing box in my attic, waiting for the meetup you promised, before everything tumbled to an end? Maybe that's that one. Here's something a little more cheerful. This is a sonnet, and I think it speaks for itself. It's called Providence Morning, for Woody. Scraping butter on my English muffin today, I think of the time you toasted them for breakfast, carried the honey-drizzled discs upstairs to the bed where we slept together one night. We kept our clothes on. There was no sex. We positioned ourselves close like spoons in a drawer. Butter and honey slipped into the muffin's cavities and into my mouth. I savored each bite. I fended off the urge to start the day. At last I rose and soon was waving goodbye, leaving you to your beekeeping in your garden. I drove off in the August sun, top down on my VW. No seatbelts, no airbags, radio busted. I sang, "Love Has No Pride," up the interstate. towards home. How are we doing for time, Michael?
We're okay.
Okay. This is a poem I wrote that I was inspired by, and I took some notes, and then I later wrote it. I think it's also a sonnet, but I'm not going to count it now. On the train from Boston to New York, which was the last time I was in New York, which was in 2019. It's called Failed Urban Renewal, New London from a Train Window. Burnt-out window holes stare from a blackened brick structure. Next to it, "In," proclaims the sign on the ground floor. The boarded-up windows are blinded by plywood. In the hazy afternoon sun, school buses line up in a parking lot. Then, between the pilings of two companion bridges, the gray water comes into view. Many-colored graffiti defaces or adorns a concrete abutment. And moving away from the city, you can see the backlots of strip malls and cinder block buildings. Ice is freezing on the ponds. Not a human in sight, only an untended landscape. In the bare trees, deserted birds' nests, balls of sticks balanced in dormant branches. Okay, that's that one. How about a couple pandemic poems? Here's one that's not too dark. I'm going to pull this out here. It's called Small Desires. This is about me and my posse, or my high school friends that get together from time to time. Not this past year. Small Desires. Small Desires. 5 middle-aged women tucked into a booth at an Upper West Side diner. We ordered omelets, coffee, refills on coffee. Our bodies were close. We devoured popovers from a common plate, tasted each other's food in a communion of sisterhood, threw 20s on the table, overtipped because we'd all waited tables in our youth. From opposite coasts, we zoomed about what we missed, being touched, kissing a grandchild, AA meetings in a church basement, sipping black coffee, slipping out for smokes or fresh air at the break. We wonder if we'll dine again at a bistro table, touch each other gently on wrist or forearm to make a point, if we'll ever again link arms as we walk down Broadway, freed from our computer screens, our layers of confinement. Will we sit maskless again in a theater, in orchestras so near the stage we can see the actors spit? I think we might be able to do that. I don't know. Okay, here's a food poem. This is a poem I wrote the very beginning of the COVID lockdown. The last time we had dinner, my husband and I had dinner with anybody else for months indoors, in praise of pasta alla norma. Infused with minced anchovies and eggplant, married to tomatoes and good olive oil, the rust-colored sauce reminds us of Sicily, our walks up the mountains and hills, on ancient drove roads in the heat, through villages where only the old have stayed, where locals offer to sell us empty houses for a pittance if we'd only pay the back taxes and fix the place up. Twice our hostess says, "It's a vegetarian meal tonight." No need to apologize. The short tubes of pasta enrobed in salsa, ricotta salting the dish beyond what we normally permit, smell of earth and sun. Fresh baked crusty bread, a salad, and pasta alla norma. Tonight, we soften the lines of our quarantine. We're transported back to Catania when we emerge from the airport terminal into the warm night, looking to fill our bellies, our souls, with food for a king composed like an aria from stuff of the ancient Sicilian earth.
Did your writing change during the pandemic?
Yeah, it kind of got longer. I think I kind of tend to go on too long in some of the poems. I've got it.
Okay.
I've got I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think I was trying to write about stuff that was right in front of me, and some of it I don't think is going to last. You know, it might have a shelf life, but some of it is, I think, bigger than that. So it'll be interesting to see. This one is called Winter Sonnet. Oh, do we have time?
Okay. Yes, we do.
No.
Please.
Okay. Winter Sonnet 2020. We rise earlier than usual, forgo coffee in bed, read what news we can bear to absorb. We make sandwiches, pack them in plastic bags. You don protective gear, mask, disposable gloves. By now you've stopped by the church to pick up grocery bags of more sandwiches in the narthex where we used to gather in fellowship on Sunday. That space will be empty and dark this morning. I imagine you lifting the bags of sandwiches, depositing them in the trunk of your car. Soon you'll make your way on the turnpike to deliver this meal to those who live on the streets, who bravely sleep on the library grates, who meet the virus on the road.
Who meet the virus on the road. Wow.
Yeah.
Lynn, what do you hope readers get, in quotes, from encountering your work?
Well, I hope that there's something that they can relate to. Even if the poem is even if I showed the poem to Providence Morning to one of the nuns that I had, in high school, that they maybe not have had a similar experience, but they could understand what was going on, or something, or they would say, "I like the way you said such and such," appreciated the phrase. Sometimes, and that's interesting because sometimes when you post your poem, I post drafts of poem or already published poems on my blog, and sometimes people will write and they'll go, "I love the phrase blah 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 blah," and I think, "Oh, good." Right. They paid attention and they delighted in some part of it. Or sometimes it'll be a very sad poem, and they'll say, "This made me." One woman wrote, "I have this poem called "In Your Absence, I'm Wearing Your Hat," which is about when my husband and I were away from each other for a few days, and this woman was widowed, and she said, "I loved your poem, and it made me think of John, her late husband," right?
Wow.
And that just made me so happy but sad at the same time. But it touched her in a way, and that's what I would hope.
Well, speaking of emotion, do you think that someone can be called a poet if they don't feel strong emotion?
Yeah, sure. I think there are a lot of poets that are extremely cerebral, and they're still poets. I mean, a lot of the Roman classical poets come to mind. Catullus.
All right.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's a different mindset. It's not that I don't appreciate poetry like that, but I don't write that. It's not in my nature. I could probably give it a try, but I think it would be arduous. That would be
We'll be back
exhausting.
with a few more poems from Lynne Viti.
Okay.
We are back Again, I am Michael Anthony Ingram. I am here with Lynne Viti. Her newest book is Dancing at Lake Montebello. Please share a few more poems before we go.
Okay, I will read a few poems, and maybe I'll end with the title poem of Dancing at Lake Montebello because it's a real shorty, but I'll get to that in a minute. This is a poem about my father, and in the Jewish tradition there's something called the Yarzeit, which is a year after the person dies, and there's a ceremony, and then every year after that, it means anniversary of the death. I guess it really means year time, literally. But this I wrote when it was the anniversary of my father's death, and he died many years ago, 28 years ago, actually. So I'll just read it. The Yarzeit for my father. In the hospice, you lay in a narrow bed, metal sides locked. Though there was no need, you were motionless, full of morphine, your skin waxy yellow, your body worn out from years of smoking, the booze and the pills. I sit, touch your hand, watch your steady breathing, aided by the oxygen tube in your nostrils. Your heart beats on, not knowing it's almost time to stop. I brush my palm across your head, the thin white hair soft under my touch. Your open eyes see nothing. When I first enter the room, I notice the man lying on the other side of the curtain, dividing your death hours from his. He pretends to watch TV, the volume a low drone. The lights dim. The nurse switches off Lethal Weapon 2. Your mouth draws into a small, rigid O. Your breathing becomes ragged. I have never been so weary. I lean my head against yours, bending over the cold bed rail and softly singing, cruising down the river on a Sunday afternoon. This is another one about my father. It's called When He Walked Off the Ship. She hardly recognized him, this gaunt soldier, muscles atrophied, broken front teeth, a small gash in the forehead. He wore his navy whites, his hat cocked, his hair in tufts sticking out from under the Dixie cup. He was 34, looked 60. She resisted the urge to weep, waited at the dock, breathing deeply to keep herself calm, repeated his name to herself like a response she might have made in church, a mumbled Amen, or pray for us who have recourse to thee. Her eyes followed his as he walked down the gangplank. Once he was ashore, she threw her arms around him, trying to pick up where they had left off before he enlisted and was on his way to Pensacola, San Pedro, Calcutta, Manchuria, dots on the world map in her 6th grade classroom, 900 days of letters. Whole swaths of words blacked out by military censors, but always signed the same way, your Jim. I'm going to read one that is kind of a fun poem and then a shorty. This one is called In Our Previous Lives We Owned a Bakery. You made panettone in round paper collars, elderflower celebration cakes, Bakewell tarts. Sometimes when a shipment of sour Seville oranges arrived by rail from faraway California, you put up jars of bitter marmalade for New Year's with grapefruit, blood oranges, lemon in the mix. Each jar displayed a label announcing, courage. We worked 16-hour days, left the children with our mothers or mothers-in-law. We gave cinnamon rolls and strong coffee to the cops, free of charge, to stay in their good graces, so they'd keep an eye on the shop midnight till dawn. Sometimes we handed over fresh Anna Dama loaves or cupcakes iced in pink buttercream. The bank wouldn't lend to women in those days. We borrowed from your uncles, paid interest as though we were common borrowers off the street. Mornings, the smell of orange rinds and sugar never ceased to intoxicate us. I watched you lift the cheesecloth like a bedsheet, tie its corners to fashion a pectin bag. I worked the overnight poolish, adding flour, water, filling great crockery bowls with dough, went to work on the cookies while the bread dough began its first rise. By 9 a.m., with 5 hours' work behind us, we were ready to flip the front door sign from closed to welcome, we're open. All this I do not actually know, but conjure up from your gift yesterday. Pandemic marmalade, labeled Courage 2021. When I open the squat mason jar, these dreams of another life appear, seem more real than imagined. Another life, with other struggles, other triumphs, perhaps no better, no worse than this life we know. And I guess the last one, right? We're out of time, right?
We've got about 5 minutes.
Oh, good. Good, I can shoehorn a couple other ones in. This is great.
Yes.
Oh, it's great to have all this time. This is called Walking at Hale Reservation. It's another pandemic poem. Early in the pandemic. The road rises before us, an asphalt path through woods, trailheads behind stone walls, traces of colonial farmhouses and work roads where ox carts drag granite from Boston and beyond. Did the ghosts of those who worked this land suffer smallpox, think of themselves as sinners in the hands of an angry God, believing they were not among the elect? Or were they stoic, philosophical? Families with their dogs, pairs of adults, runners, walk ahead or pass us going the opposite way. In strong sunlight, we shed our gloves, tie our puffy jackets around our waists, look for messages of spring, trees budding, a spot of new green emerging from leaf beds. These signs are scant. The season holds back, but we crave any hint to reassure us something better's on the way. After that first week of shutting ourselves up in the house, we already miss what we used to complain about, jobs grudgingly performed or obligations we had to meet. We turn the last corner, arrive at the parking lot. We climb into the car, sanitize our hands, a secular ritual as close to sacred as we have. Okay. I had a big stack here. I think I've come to the end of my stack.
All right.
Okay. I've got, I'll read two short ones from Dancing at Lake Montebello. I can find two short ones. Oh, Murphy in August. This is another broken sonnet, and I can put my hands on it. Oh, Murphy's in this section. I'm sorry. I thought I had it all set up. Just bear with me 1 second, because I...
Oh, yes. Not a problem.
Okay, Murphy in August, where is it? I think I would know my... Oh, here it is. Okay. So this is for Richard Murphy, who was the college housemate of my younger sister. And he was a great guitar player who became a computer scientist guy, a tech guy. But he majored in, like, German or philosophy or something. So what do? You become a coder or whatever. Murphy in August. I wrote this for Murphy when he retired a couple years ago. Murphy in August. Those without air conditioning in the dog days found cold shelter in the neighborhood movie houses. On such a night, we collected you from the bus station, fresh from your years in Freiburg, long-haired, bearded, last off the bus. You schlepped a backpack and your guitar, came for one last party before we had to grow up. By the time you came down to Baltimore, we were cutting our hair, dressing for success. You were the last to dip your toe into adulthood, Trade your busker's license for a programmer's desk. That humid night, the 60s were over, the 70s half gone. The moving sidewalk didn't care who was left behind. You hopped on to a job, marriage, 2 kids, and a 401k.
Mm.
And that's all true. He did.
Wow.
Okay. Dancing at Lake Montebello. This is for my friend Chris, who thought up the idea of doing what we did in this, as it's described in this poem, and whose father was a real jazz buff, and he knew a lot about late-night Chinese restaurants in Baltimore, because it's where all the jazz musicians would go after the famous ballroom concert was over. Or actually, it wasn't a concert; it was a date, and it was one of the few places where that wasn't totally segregated. And I think it had to do with the fact that it was Chinese and after hours and so on. So it was like, and this, my friend's father shared some of this information with us. Dancing at Lake Montebello, Lake Montebello is a big reservoir in Baltimore City.
Okay.
Dancing at Lake Montebello. The road at night was ours. We sang happy birthday to you, who cajoled us to dance around the edges of the reservoir in the headlights of our parked car at midnight. Friday nights we glued ourselves to the sofa in your family's den. You explained who Oscar Levant was, why we should be amused by his patter. We heard Monk play jazz in a black box theater. You steered us to the best Chinese food in town. You schooled us. This is how we first saw the world, splayed open before us, for us. Flipping through to see if there's another shorty here.
All right.
A good closing poem. Well, here's a sad one, but I love it. It's called Shades at the Reunion, and I may have read this before. Shades at the Reunion, as in Shades Ghosts. Shades at the Reunion. When we gather like this around the table every 5 or 10 years, drinks in hand, raising toasts, in the back of our minds always are the ghosts. The cousin who died at 40 when the cancer flared. The school friend, gone at barely 50. She loved her smokes. Toxins and her genes did her in. The rest of us, we have survived, though we're not sure why or how. My friend, the hard-edged newsman, laughed when he told me his on-air transition phrase, elsewhere in the news, as if we could move from tsunami to oil spill to death of an ex-president with any kind of grace. When he lay dying in his hospital bed in Croton-on-Hudson, this old journalist stared at TV images of Baltimore burning. It's all like it was before, he murmured. Knowing all this, we sit in the cool air, September sun on our faces, hearing the songbirds carry on like Yeats' miracles in Byzantium.
Wow.
And that,
what? I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say that newsman was a very, very dear friend of mine, who was my old style newsman. He was my age, but he was like, he was a Scotch drinker, he was a smoker, and he ate what he wanted, and it wasn't good. And I miss him terribly. His birthday is in May, and my birthday is in May, and I think of him every year on May 2nd. And he's probably been gone for about 7 years. Yeah, Mike.
Wow.
That's for Mike.
What did you learn when writing the book?
One of the things I learned was that I had spent so much time, and I think this was the influence of one of my poetry teachers in the past 9 years, who Baltimore born, but he was Poet Laureate of Boston by the time I really got to know him. He really felt that it was important to write about family, to write about people, and so I think I did a lot of that. And putting this book together, I realized that it was one of the people who wrote a blurb for the book, who's not a poet, said, and I thought to myself, oh, I never saw that. She said, this whole book of poems is like a memoir. It's a memoir in poetry. And I think that's what I learned, was that in putting this book together, I tried to kind of section it into 3 discrete sections that each had a theme, but they're linked in that it was sort of girlhood, young womanhood, older, and there was, even though not every poem is about me, there's a lot of who I knew and who I think of and what they meant to me, and so I think that was one of the things that was really fun about the book. But I really am trying to move into something that's more, I don't want to say objective, but sort of more about the present and not necessarily about me. And maybe my view. And I have a lot of political poems. I didn't read them tonight because it's like they're really like I'm really angry poems.
Right.
It was probably it was probably during the election season. It's sort of like I have a poem in my head that is sort of like the response that I would get when I was doing phone banking or text banking, and I was and some people would be like, oh, okay, and other people would be like, so hostile, and the language that they would, they'll text, people will text anything. And it was kind of like, whoa. So I started sort of making some notes about that, and I thought there's something, I'm going to write something about that, but I'm not there yet. I am taking a vacation from all of that for the time.
Right. Where is your book available? Where's your book available?
Everywhere books are sold.
Everywhere books are sold.
Okay, but I've checked. I mean, I steer people to a company called bookshop.org because they give some of their profits to independent bookstores, which I'm a big supporter of. But bookshop.org, and they sell it for, I think, a little less than Amazon. Amazon, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, and your local independent bookstore, and also my publisher, Apprentice House of Loyola, Maryland. You can order directly from them. But, yeah, it's almost like I think Apprentice House does a great job of distribution because you can I was stunned. You can find it on Target. So, yeah. And you can always order it through your local independent bookstore. And it's a bargain because it's only $12.99 for a full-length poetry.
What's next for you creatively? What's next for you creatively?
I'm working on a new collection. I did not read any of the stuff from that. Well, a new collection. It's not new poems. And a lot of them are sort of nature poems with like a dark underside. And some of them are Ireland poems. And so that's next for me to sit down and really put together. And I'm also working on the place that I have recently moved to was in its former life a not very good psychiatric hospital where a lot of not very good treatment was given to people. And it also was a place where some famous people came either to dry out from alcohol issues or in some cases just, other kinds of psychiatric issues. And suffice it to say, without giving away too much about the theme of this book, I think there's some poems here. And a very famous poet was treated here for many years. So I'm doing a lot of the historical research right now about that, and then I think I can get like a book out of it. A book of poems. So I think it's for me. This is like new territory. So that's a project, and I don't know what else. I do like to write fiction. I've got a long manuscript that I need to get to work on before I get to be 100 years old. So that comes after the next full-length poetry collection that I mentioned first. So the nature poetry one. So we've got a few things.
Yes, you do. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending time with us. I'm sure the listeners can tell why you're one of my favorite poets. Your work is, as I said, sublime.
Thank you so much, Michael. This has been so much fun. I really, really appreciate it.
Yes, I wish you nothing but the best.
Thanks again, and the same to you. And I will be listening to QP and seeing who else you have on soon.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Well, on that note, I'll say good night to everyone.
Okay.
And as I share every week, let poetry ring. Good night, everybody.
Yes, definitely. Good night.
You have just listened to the Quintessential Listening Poetry Online Radio Podcast with your host, Dr. Michael Anthony Ingram. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or Stitcher. And make sure to catch our next episode.